to be listening into the live streaming. So that's about broadly it. Welcome, Pranav. You're still looking as worried as you were looking the other day.
Excuse me, we are live now.
We are live?
Okay.
Yeah, we are live.
Okay. So over to you, Dilipji, I think.
Yeah. So good afternoon and welcome to this FICCI webinar on the Indian tourism industry, impacts, survival, and roadmap for a better future. I would like to begin by giving a very special welcome to all our panelists. Srimati Shreya Guha, Principal Secretary, Tourism, Art and Culture, Government of Rajasthan. Srimati Rupinder Brar, Additional Director General, Ministry of Tourism, Government of India. Dr. Jyotsna Suri, Past President FICCI, Chairperson FICCI Tourism Committee, and the Chairperson and Managing Director of the Lalit Suri Hospitality Group. Mr. Pranab Sarkar, President IATO. Mr. Rajesh Maglo, Co-Founder and Group CEO, Make My Trip. Mr. Deepak Deva, Co-Chairman FICCI Tourism Committee and Managing Director SITA, TCI, and Distant Frontiers. Mr. Ankush Nijavan, Co-Chairman FICCI Travel and Technology Committee, Co-Founder TBO Group and Managing Director Nijavan Group. Mr. Ashish Kumar, Co-Chairman FICCI Travel Technology Committee, who will be really moderating this session and taking it forward. Distinguished delegates from the tourism industry, ladies and gentlemen. I would first just like to welcome all of you. And at this point of time, where at least everybody in the panel and most of you viewing know the impact that this lockdown has had on the tourism industry, it is also one of the sectors that will take a longer time to revive. The idea of this discussion is really to get each one's point of view and then come together and actually understand on what we need to collectively take forward, first within industry as a group, and then go forward to government and request the government on whatever needs to be done for ensuring the survival, continuation, and a roadmap to a better future. FICCI has made many recommendations both at the center and state. We will circulate that to you in the interest of time because this is a very short webinar. But again, I would like to welcome each one of you and hand it back to Ashish Kumar for taking it forward. So good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Shenoy. And first of all, I would like to, and we would all like to thank FICCI and yourself for taking the initiative to put such a well sought out, assorted and integrated panel together. So thank you very much for putting this for us. Second, of course, other friends in FICCI, like Manish Ahuja and Anirban, who've been behind the scene working very assiduously to put this together. And thank you again, Dr. Suri, for supporting the cause. And so I'll just take, and I welcome all the audience, and I'm sure the audience would over a period of time be logging in. I'm told, all of you, that there are over 3,500 to 4,000 people who may be listening in or seeing us. And the message here, which we would want everybody who's listening and seeing us, is not a discussion which we are having among the panelists, but a discussion which we are having where we hope to have that wisdom translated across on the ground to each one of you at your workspace. And that was the general idea to put this across, because in today's technology world and web world, it's made it possible to have such a large audience together. Otherwise, it would have been quite a logistical nightmare to put that together, social distancing aside. So thank you. I'll just begin off by saying that the travel and tourism, besides being one of the largest industries worldwide, is actually one of the largest communities worldwide. Former weaver in Badoy, who's making the carpets for a tourist who comes in, to a guide in France who's translating it for you, it just about touches everybody in everybody's life. So therefore, the industry itself is into multitude of fragmentation. Even in India, we have all segments. And this panel today just about covers all panel of and all segments of business. We have Ankush here, who today disperses technology across the SME sector with product base. We have Rakshit, from FCM, who touches the lives of the corporate traveler, the holiday maker, the foreign exchange entity which he runs. Rajesh Megro just about does everything. I need not explain what Make My Trip does and what they brought on the table. Deepak Deva heads a very large inbound company, and he brings a certain amount of experience in the industry, and so does Pranav. And of course, Dr. Suri represents the entire industrial fraternity of India, not only the hospitality. So there is a wealth of talent and knowledge available on this platform. We will have Dhruv Chirangi logging in later. He's about half an hour late, I'm told, from Yatra and Ebix now. So what we thought that our entire discussion is going to be based around two parameters. One is survival. How do we survive these times? And if the survival, what does it mean? What is the pipeline of survival? How will be the staggered opening of products, services, inventory? Obviously, if somebody says, assuming 14th of April is the lockdown period over, do we see all the planes flying all over on the 15th of April? It ain't going to happen, even in India. Forget about the rest of the world. The traveling is, so the impact is going to be both social, economic, and cultural on the way people choose their holidays, the way people travel worldwide. Would they still want to have 2,000 people in a cruise liner traveling together for 10 days voyage? I don't know. We don't know how people will react to that. Will there be some kind of a health advisory coming from each country when visas are involved, like we had the yellow fever for Africa sometime? So would there be some kind of a certification to travel when you cross border from Spain to Italy? I don't know, and vice versa. So therefore, there's going to be whole areas which will affect the industry. But not only will it affect the industry, it will affect your revenues and cash flows. Rakshit, who's in the corporate travel, would vouch that probably in the corporate, in the business travel world, 30% of the traffic which goes in is from the IT personnel which travel into the US for jobs and various on-site jobs. So would they still, the Infosys and the Wipros and the SCL still sending engineers down on site? Will America be able to take that? And so on and so forth. So, you know, while in these times have been coming, whether the Prime Minister's term of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas may have sounded like a political slogan to us a few years ago. But to me personally, from where I sit in the travel industry, I think that's our mantra, because all industries, everybody will have to pull together to make things happen. So we decided in the last WebEx we had together that the conversation is going to be built around survival. Maybe we'll spend more time on survival. So what does survival mean? Survival means is that how do we re-engineering our cost? We have costs which are already in place. Some have huge capital investments in place. Some have operating costs in place. How do we rationalize those costs? Is working from home going to be a social impact going future? Do we going to have Make My Trip think about setting 40% of its employees to work out of Bareilly or anywhere else from their hometowns and logging in into a central base, or anybody else for that matter? So there's going to be a social dynamic to costs involved. And how do you take care of a very large section which is receivable? Pranav Sarkar from IATO last time mentioned that, you know, operators will have their monies in the European and the other overseas market. How do they get to recover that? That's a cost. Separately in the corporate travel business, they're huge receivables. How do you get to manage those? Because those may become liabilities tomorrow. So the survival is going to be based on rationalizing your cost, looking at the future strategies, and managing your cash flow. Now, how do you manage your cash flow? Obviously, we are hoping in some manner, and the government will come into it, whether it be form of SOPs or taxes, etc. But that's only one component of cash flow management and revival. The second is going to be revival. Now, revival is a longer strategy perspective. What is needed in the industry in each segment to revive? Is it the processes need to change? Is it technology which comes into play? And so on and so forth. So therefore, I'll just open the discussion with each of the esteemed panel, and everybody will have about 3 minutes to give an overview around the survival and the revival in the industry they are on. And then we will, of course, be talking to each other in the panelists. And to conclude it, then we will have 5 takeaways, perhaps, from the conversation as to be what needs to be crystallized going forward. And then, of course, for the audience, my friends who are listening in, we will have a 30 minutes Q&A post that. So over to Dr. Suri for you to help us kickstart this.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Thank you, FICCI, for organizing this. Namaskar, and I welcome you, and I also thank all of you for joining us today. Unprecedented times, never experienced anything like this across the world. Our industry, which is the travel and tourism industry, has clearly been impacted the most and will also take the longest time to come back to normal or to revive, if at all. As has been mentioned, that we now need to actually revisit and reorient ourselves altogether, because if social distancing is going to be the new norm, which it is, what is going to happen to meetings? What is going to happen to weddings? What is going to happen to all the MICE movement? Restaurants, how do we place our guests in our restaurants? Will people really travel or not travel? Will they continue to do meetings via Zoom as we are doing right now? So we really have to reinvent and revisit the whole holistic aspect of hospitality, travel, and tourism. As far as the revival is concerned, while we were having a discussion with Ashish a little earlier on, I said it's not like it's going to be hey presto and everything is going to be back to normal. It's going to take a very long time for this industry, perhaps not only our industry, but for everyone to really come back into a normal pace. And therefore, what we need to do, if we talk about survival, let's first talk about and revival. I think our first effort is for the survival. Only then can there be a revival. Now, if our industry is not able to survive, then there is no question of revival. How do we survive? Cash flow, of course, is dead. There is no cash flow. However, we still have to keep the institutions going. The central government has done something. I mean, we asked for a moratorium for 1 year. We got 3 months. 3 months is going to get us nowhere. As a matter of fact, we've all been able to do the March salaries, but come April, which has come already, how are we going to pay salaries? How are we going to then pay our other dues? We have dues to the states. The states come into the picture then. We have very hefty license fees, whether it's property tax, whether it's lease license, operating licenses. Then we have a huge payout for heat, light, power, and water. Our industry pays at commercial rates, and we pay at a designated initial annual payout that we are supposed to do. Now, if you're not utilizing all of that, and you still have to pay the optimum, how are you going to do it? So the question right now is more about survival. And if we survive, definitely we will continue to be part of the revival, because we employ maximum number of people. There are 6 to 7 crore jobs that are all interdependent, directly or indirectly with us. And we actually go across. I mean, we come from a CEO to a little house boy or a kitchen stewarding boy. It goes across the spectrum. There's skilled, there's semi-skilled, there's different layers of people that are employed directly or indirectly in our industry. So I think right now our aim, and we need support from the government. We definitely need a 1-year moratorium. That's the basic that the government can give us, because all of us are highly leveraged. We all have heavy interest payouts and principal payouts to give. And then the states need to help us by waiving off these license fees. And as and when business comes back to normal, we're ready to pay. So we're not asking for anything for free. All we are saying is, this is an industry which is on the ventilator. Help us get off the ventilator and then we will be part of your revival process. Thank you very much. Back to you, Ashish.
Thank you, Dr. Suri. And I'll, of course, invite the other panel members. But before I do that, and since you mentioned the government, we here, I think, collectively will acknowledge the role of the government. Because, like we said, it's unprecedented time. There is no playbook available for any government or anybody in the world to lean back on. And the government is doing a great job. And the other day, Shri Rupinder Braji mentioned that she's never been busier. She's been perhaps more busier during the lockdown period than otherwise, right? And it's a fact. While we are doing our own bit, the government is working overtime, let's to say. So we certainly acknowledge the role of the government. We acknowledge, therefore, that Srimati Rupinder Brar, Additional Director General, Ministry of Tourism, Government of India, could join us, or Srimati Shreya Goha, Principal Secretary, Tourism, Government of Rajasthan, could join us. We will, of course, invite them later on once we finish with other panelists for their overview. But it's, for the moment, over to Deepak Deva to say. Deepak?
Thank you very much, Ashish. I think I'll just break this down into the survival, revival, and growth. And let's first, I think, step back for a minute and also acknowledge that as an industry and as an industry together, India handled the crisis very well of sending people back. Hotels collaborated. Hotels and other suppliers did not use this opportunity to take advantage. And I think we handled as a country and as a trade, we should be proud of ourselves for the way we sent back all the clients to their respective countries. And even today, there is efforts going on by Air India, etc., to repatriate foreigners. So let's start on that note and thank everybody. The reality today, and I will only speak about inbound because we have other experts out here to speak about other parts of travel. I think as far as the inbound business is concerned, we have to be realistic. From now to September, there is going to be no business. Okay, the situation is bad and there will be no business. That's realistic. October to December, there'll be a trickle, maybe 25% of what we've planned. And January 21 onwards, business will start flowing, if we are lucky. And trust me, I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. So this is where I see the business for the inbound piece coming up. Of course, we can debate it and maybe I'm wrong, but this is the general feeling that we've got from our partners overseas and other information that is available. And we also have to appreciate how this will unfold. I mean, while we are all talking of how and what we should be doing, I think we also need to make sure that we know how this will unfold. First, the borders have to open. Secondly, the source markets have to allow their people to travel. Look at the factors that will need to unfold. Air liquidity is critical. How many of the airlines are going to survive to actually ferry people from all over the world into India? And more important than that, and to just take from where Mrs. Suri made a point, our supply chain, that's hotels, domestic airlines, transport companies, guides, etc. Everybody has to be healthy in a shape to deliver the required service. You may bring in the guests, but you need the infrastructure also for them to go through. So I think that is where we really need to focus and we need to get our attention. Of course, we will get over the crisis. The discussion is how will we get over the crisis? And there are a few things that the government can do, and there are a few things that the trade can do. We have one very big opportunity in all of this, and that is that China is a very big inbound market, and that market is going to be damaged. The brand of the country for inbound tourism is going to be damaged. And I think it is a very big opportunity for India to try, when the business revives, to grab that piece of business. Unlike the manufacturing sector, which let it go, let us focus on getting the tourism piece at least as much as we can from the China business. I would just make 3-4 quick points and then pass it on within my 3 minutes time. I think for us going forward, and I would now talk about the revival piece, we need to finalize an aggressive Incredible India strategy where the government along with the private sector must plan and be ready so that we can launch this at the right time in order to market the destination and get the eyeballs to India and then finally people traveling. Also, a lot has been spoken about GST, but I would not go on and on about taxes and what the government should pay. But it would be nice not to have any GST during this period of at least till 31st of March, if the government can afford it. Another small point, maybe for optics and maybe just for something that we can use to advertise our return, and this the government can do very easily. Make foreigners and Indians pay the same price at the ASI monuments. It's just good optics, and it brings the tour price down. Mrs. Suri has already spoken about moratorium. I'll not repeat that. We could also consider a zero visa fees for 1 year. I'm again saying for 1 year. We do not want this to go on forever. We want just a certain period of a window for us to start reviving the business. SEIS is a very important part of our business. Thanks to the government, we have it now for the last financial year. For 19-20, we have it, which will be payable this year. The government should consider maybe making it, instead of 7, allowing us a 10% SEIS, which will give us the opportunity to use the delta to take care of the salary load that we have in the dead months. And I will make just one more point for a particular destination which gets ignored but needs the support. The government of Goa has to make landing fees free till 30th of April 2021 if they want that state to survive in tourism. And this is something that is maybe a state subject, but my message to the Goa government is, if you don't do this, you will lose out on the 300,000 to 400,000 tourists that arrive into Goa and keep the tourism economy of Goa going. So that's my bit, Ashish, for now, and we'd be happy to debate about various other topics like cash flow and where will it all go when the business starts. I think that we can leave for the second half of this program.
Sure. I mean, the first 3 minutes is really a preamble, and there'll be ample opportunity for everybody to talk. And Pranab, we are over to you and Eato and whatever you thought.
Yes, thank you, Ashish, and thank you, FICCI, for organizing this forum of discussions. Many of our members, smallest of the operators and the biggest of our organizations, all are very keen to participate in these kind of discussions, which is very important. And as the situation is, and rightly is the put forward the words by Dr. Suri, that we are really undergoing a very big cash crunch scenario. However, for the tour operator point of view, I would like to mention here that we need to survive first before the revival. As you rightly mentioned, the two topics we have. To survive, we are in a very big problem where our members have paid the advances to the hotels, airlines, safari parks, and luxury trains. They are all stuck. Some of the hotels, they have paid. Some of the hotels are saying, please adjust in your future bookings to the same clients. We do not know same clients will come back or not. We are very much, disturbed on the situation. And they are claiming the refund. From where we will get the refund if you don't get the refund from these suppliers we have already paid in advance? Under zero billing, again, there is no cash flow. Government is saying you have to pay full salaries. From where we will pay the full salaries? Where we will pay the rentals, electricity bill, telephone bills, insurances? It is very, very, difficult situation for all of us. And other thing we have to see is that unless there is a bailout package by the government to really help the small of the tour operators and also the industry, and bigger chunk of our industry is unorganized sector, how to help them? It is a very big question. So therefore, we only can talk about the recognized sector, which is very much in practice of doing this business, connected with the government and connected with some associations. So how to revive them? Now, our another worry is that WTTC has said that there will be a reduction of 30% business in the next year, when there will be less people traveling. Therefore, it is very, very difficult for us whether we will get really 30% less or 40% less, all depending on company to company. Smaller get may further less. So in view of that 50% or 60% business, are we going to maintain the 100% staff? We have a very big question that from where we will be making these payments. Therefore, it is very important that there has to be some way forward, that we get some kind of relief from the government, whether in the form of cash credit to the low salary people, low salary staff directly to their bank account, or we get SEIS as mentioned by Deepak, that it should be increased from 7 to 10%, so that we have something extra for the off season. Earlier, we used to have some cash flow in hand during off seasons because the payment cycle was going on, and we used to have advance payment for the future booking. Now, future booking advance payments are dried up. All the hotels and the airline and the transporters, all suppliers are asking payments because it is already 31st March past, from where we will get all those funds. Therefore, only ACI is not going to help us. We need some fund extra above, and for that we request government to give us collateral free 10 years long term loan facility depending on company to company, and that should be interest free and EMI to be paid after 8 to 10 months, so that we are in a position when the business starts, we are paying the EMI. So therefore, these are the few points to start with for survival. And for revival, I have few suggestions, as already mentioned by Deepak, that GST can be considered for future to reduce the package cost, and the visa-free regime for another, at least for 1 year, and keep the Incredible India road show and the promotional activities ready for those countries. Immediately we can be able to take up those countries, come out of this corona syndrome, and they are ready to travel. Immediately we should go to those countries for the promotions, and our whole plan out the social media, the electronic media, everything should be ready in advance, so that we can immediately release those to attract them. As rightly mentioned, we should have some kind of benefit if India goes low on corona, so that people will have more confidence to travel to our country. And most importantly, one more thing, that India need to be very clean and hygienic country that need to be exposed, because after all these diseases, it is very important that our country should come out of this kind of syndrome, and people should see that this is the country we need to visit. So we have to make it very attractive, and people to look for India, that this is the area where we should visit. We have very good two options where Ayurveda and meditations are there, and we have beautiful adventure tourism areas which can be promoted. And thirdly, I must say that domestically we are very rich, and domestic tourism will revive the faster. Before the inbound start, domestic tourism will take part, and we suggest that people should travel within India, and they will also not opt going abroad, considering the present situation abroad. Our country people will not try to venture out all those countries. Instead, they will roam around within the country. Therefore, most of the MICE business will come back very soon within India. Most of the weddings, they will stay put in India. So everything will look positive as soon as these things are a little better. And on top of it, if there is any vaccination comes in between, and there is a confidence building among the traveler that this vaccination can take care, I'm sure we had very tough time earlier also. This tough time also we will recover, and we will take very minimal time to come back and do our business once again. With this, I say thank you for the first part. Then next part we will continue further. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranav. And you mentioned, and we all saw that travel is a piece which has now moved to tier 2, 3, 4, 5 cities in the country, and the distribution base over the last few years has escalated tremendously with economic development. So I invite Ankush Nijavan, who I believe has his pulse on the ground to the smallest SME across the country, to be able to share some thoughts. Ankush? Ankush, you gone silent? Are you on mute?
I'm okay now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So thank you, Ashish, and thank you, FICCI. Thank you, Mrs. Bra. Thank you, Ms. Gua. So Ashish, I'm actually, as you rightly said, I'm actually representing the many large intermediaries, which is basically the travel agents, tour operators / guides, and many people in the ecosystem. What is the worry right now? Is 26 lakh people who are connected today with these segments, which I just mentioned to you right now. People are very, very worried, obviously for obvious reasons we all of us know. They don't know whether they will have jobs after 6 months, after 8 months. I've been getting calls from everybody across the country, and the worst is I don't have an answer, because this is an enemy we are fighting for how long, and the worst is who's the enemy? Nobody knows yet. And until you don't find a vaccination, I don't see things bouncing to even 50% of what all of us did in 2019. I don't see this happening till October. When it comes to the governmental side for the survival, I think a 12-month moratorium is very, very important, whether it's the GST, TDS, even the TCS, which was spoken a lot, the 5% which was supposed to be applicable starting 1st April on the outbound packages. I think that's been deferred till 1st October, which is good. But the reality is it's still going to hit us on starting 1st October. And I strongly believe it's going to make situation worse for our outbound market, which is almost 30 million people who travel outside. The reason why, because we'll have a disadvantage fighting companies which are active, who are not registered in India and are registered overseas. This is something the government should definitely look into. Even the banks, I think there should be specific debt secretarial kind of restructuring for the travel fraternity, because many of us don't have the cash reserves and the balance sheets. Most of the smaller SMEs today are living on these credit working lines they have. I think the banks should be kind of, should be giving soft credit so that they don't convert into NPAs. The working capital gap is a lot for the industry which I am representing right now. I think these are the certain things which I think the government / the banks can help for the guys to survive. I see visa regime changing significantly. Through a friend of mine who works, in the visa industry, mentioned to me there might not be any Schengen visa going forward. Everybody is going to apply their own visas, because every government wants a health certificate / indemnity, like what you said, even for the yellow fever if you're going to Kenya. So I think there'll be a Corona card which you'll have to carry when you travel. Hopefully, once the vaccine is is established, I'm sure this regime might be more flexible. Debtors, I don't think many debtors are going to survive. A lot of people need to collect money, be it hotels, be it airlines. Even the largest airlines in India have gone on a credit shell. There is a serious liquidity crunch even from the suppliers. And I don't even know when the airlines will fly back, or the hotels will even have 25% occupancy. This is really, really hurting India at the moment, the Indian outbound industry. Even IATA today is in negative. This is the first time when IATA actually owes money to the fraternity. There was a very strong email received 2 days back from IATA that they will also be making a credit shell now, not paying refunds on the BSP. My question is, why is, the agents who anyway are small and medium have enough challenges to even pay the salaries, their bills, and on the top of that, they have recoveries to do. And now the last nail in the coffin is even that large suppliers have even called the force majeure, which every contract, I think nobody looked at it before this Corona happened, but everybody suddenly now is looking in by delaying their payouts, their incentives, their recovery. So I think they're very, very challenging times when it comes to the survival. From revival point of view, I think it will only start when you see something positive happening. I think everybody will have to actually assess the impact, what they have faced. I think true leadership and entrepreneurship will be tested, on how good you were in good days, and now that's something you really need to demonstrate, on holding your companies, your employees. I think health and safety will become a very important point going forward for all of us. Reassess the cost and budgets, because a lot of us spend money when the good days are there, but the reality is now somebody has to really look down in their P&L and save costs wherever they can for at least for the next 1 year. Renegotiate contracts. I think super important. When you talk to your suppliers, your partners, your airlines, the hotels, your guides, whoever it might be, I think that's something which really needs a real look to renegotiate, for you to survive. Alliances. I think this is a time when you will see people who never look through each other in eyes will now suddenly start holding each other. They have an M&A or some alliances kind of stuff to make sure that they all survive together. I think rework your cash positions, because this is something, it's a complete cash burn. As Dr. Suri said, there is zero revenue happening. All of us are actually funding our own businesses from our cash flows. I think watching your cash flows and working capital will definitely be one of the key things you have to look on a daily basis to go forward for the next 1 year. And I think find people who are intelligent, who can mentor you, who can guide you, who are facing challenges like this. Might not be from the travel industry. Some people who see from out of the box, they can probably see your situation much differently what probably one can see. And my only humble request to everybody is, we should try to hold as much as we can with our employees, because almost 50 out of the 26 lakhs people I mentioned, 50% of them actually withdraw a salary less than 20,000 rupees. So I think as long one can hold them, we should, and I really wish that the government, and the banks really help us for the next 12 months. When I say help us, meaning our industry, because these are tough times, and I really wish this days become normal in the next 6 months. Thank you, Ashish. Ashish?
Did we lose him?
I think we lost Ashish for a bit. Shall we just wait for a minute for him to come back?
Yeah.
Sure.
Ashish, are you there, Ashish?
No, he's not.
While we are waiting,
Don't see him there.
for him, why don't we ask Rajesh? Rajesh, why don't you give your intro and Ashish can join us?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that, Deepak. Happy to do that. In the interest of time, I guess we have like 3,000 people logged in, and let Ashish come back. So good afternoon, everyone, just the wider audience. Let me start by actually hoping you and everyone around you are keeping safe and healthy. Folks, a lot has been said by the previous panelists already. A lot of the ideas on the survival side, quite in detail. Everybody has talked about it. Ankush just spoke about, all the pain, the issues, the challenges that we have in the current situation for even all the travel agents. So, representing Make My Trip, I can kind of resonate with all of that, what has been said already. And yes, I would like to reiterate the situation is pretty grim, and it's going to be a long haul journey from here on. So I think we'll have to all get prepared for what everyone is coining the new term is before we get back to the BC, which is not before Christ, but before COVID era. It's going to be a long haul journey, and it's going to be very, very painful. So let's talk about the survival. What I think, rather than just repeating what has already been said, if you really would have noticed for from all the previous panelists, that they said the real issue on survival today is the availability of money, the availability of cash. And what is that we can do? Maybe I can just throw more light and more color on the ground situation. Even if, everyone has spoken about the moratorium request that we've all been pushing with the government, various ministries, and RBI seems to have done some bit. The first point is that they have to do a lot more. But let me tell you on the ground what needs to happen for it to actually see some kind of a benefit going to the recipients as well. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult. It will remain at 30,000 feet level and will not get implemented. And the ground level situation is as follows, that this travel industry, small and medium enterprises, including online players and all of that, they just don't have any collaterals. That's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the industry. You don't have, and if you have any, if you follow the conventional way of looking at the balance sheets, looking at the credit evaluation, is just not going to work. So there has to be a different level of mandate that has to flow in from the top for banks to implement it on the ground. Otherwise, I can tell you from my personal experience, and I've been talking to pretty much every player in the market, and the real struggle is that they are not necessarily being able to get fresh capital, fresh loan to cater to all their fixed expenses, because that's the focus right now. I mean, and among the fixed expenses, it's actually the people cost. And everybody is worried about creating huge amount of unemployment in the process, while they're kind of digging into the reserves or whatever little reserves that this industry had. Again, I have to say, unfortunately, not a great situation. Not that industry is very cash healthy, and across the board. And I'm talking about large to medium to small players, and given the fact that it is hugely fragmented, and therefore whatever is even being talked about at the top, my request to all the government panelists out here is just to take it back, and we are doing our bit to represent to the other ministries as well, to make sure that it gets implemented in a way that people actually get loans, not necessarily 10,000 questions being asked. Because if it is going to be liquidity measure for the banks from the top, and on the ground it's going to be conventional evaluation, it's just not going to work. It's absolutely not going to work. Ankush spoke about the civil aviation. Let's not forget that they are absolutely distressed right now. Every airline, I mean, despite the fact that Air India is actually funded by taxpayers' money today, despite minister saying that open up the flight tickets after 15th, Air India is actually blocked it till 30th. There has to be a reason why they blocked it. There has to be a genuine reason why they blocked it. So clearly, it's a very difficult and a challenging situation. But I think among all of the measures that people talked about, the TCSs and the GSTs and the license relief and all of those on the cost side, the biggest one to my mind is to get some real cash flowing into the industry, and whichever way that can help. And I understand, as from my previous interactions with the government, that it may not be easy for the government. I totally understand that. But can it be possible through the banks? I mean, if it is not a subsidy, can it be made possible through the banks and real life situation, right? So I think that is something that I would like to really emphasize. And if that starts happening, I do think that the industry will be able to manage the cash flow really tightly, and some of the other measures that people spoke about. I think people have just seen and been there and looked at some of these situations. I mean, a lot of the panelists are very, very experienced out here. We ourselves have seen 20 years in the industry and have actually gone through many mini crises. And I call this particular one as a mother of all the crises for sure. But we've been through similar situations, and I think there are learnings that we can talk about even more. But people would definitely and already happening. I mean, it's not that people have to be really told about this, about really tight cash management, do all the possible negotiation that you could possibly do, and so on. So I think the industry will definitely do its bit, but I don't think there is this unprecedented situation ever existed where there was a zero revenue. There's going to be a zero revenue for the whole industry in a month and maybe months to come. So therefore, it's the situation is critical at that level, and I think that is something that could help. Some of the other points on the revival, I actually had one very good suggestion. Hopefully, that people would like it and also should help the industry. And I'm linking it back to the point that was made earlier on the domestic travel. I think, overall speaking, yes, domestic travel might pick up first, and yeah, outbound is going to be travel. I know Deepak mentioned inbound is going to be zero till September. But what if, and I don't know if, and I think it's pretty close to perhaps this, Prime Minister's at some level in his mind, just to promote domestic tourism and domestic travel as well. How about actually recommending, and we made that recommendation already, and I think it was received well, to make the domestic travel expenditure more like a deduction from the income in future. That's like a post-COVID situation, because that will be a stimulus of a different kind, and it doesn't really hurt because it's more like a deduction from the income, like an ATG. Like if you donate, you get 50% deduction. If you spend on travel, you should get some deduction. on from your income, and people would like to then maybe pick up the discretionary travel, because right now there's huge amount of fear. As we come out of the situation, there's going to be huge amount of apprehension and fear in people's mind. And how do we check that? Besides obviously taking all the kind of measures that I think someone spoke about, just upping the element of hygiene across the board in the ecosystem. And I think we need to do all of that. So I think that might be one suggestion worth considering. And some of the other learnings I'll just very quickly mention from our own past experience, which might help. I don't think panicking would help. I think panicking, if we panic, I don't think we'll be able to think positive and think forward in terms of what all measures that we need to take in this crisis situation. I think we will have to work even harder, like never before, with a lot of determination and survival instincts. And these are some of the areas that practically experienced in the past, so I'm talking about it. And I think we'll have to get used to, we'll be very frugal, we'll have to get used to live with less or no means for some time. And last but not the least, before I hand it over, is that I think we'll have to, a lot of the players and the leaders and the entrepreneurs will have to lead from front and lead by example. And I think do as much. I think there's a lot of, this crisis situation is going to demand a huge amount of sacrifice from everyone, every individual. And I really, really mean it. And therefore it has to be led from the top, led from the front to set the tone, to do more sacrifice than others. The people who've been earning more, people who can afford more, have to sacrifice a lot more than the people on the front line. I mean, less than 20,000 rupees or less than 15,000 rupees, while government will do whatever government can do. But I think we will also have to look at like this philosophically for us to be able to just, help ease out some of the situation on the frontliners, because maybe we can survive making bigger sacrifices for a few months or maybe a year, and some of the others just can't. And therefore, that is something that we need to do. So I guess I would just end it by saying it's definitely going to be a painful process. It's not going to be. All our previous crisis situations have been extremely painful. Luckily, we ended up on the right side of it. But it will only help that much more if we stay healthy and positive to be able to weather this storm effectively. I would leave it at this and hand it over back to Ashish. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Rajesh. Ashish, good to have you back. We'll hand it over.
Sorry. Thank you, Deepak, for helping out. Sorry, the power trip and the router trip, and I'm back again. And I think, Rakshit, without any preamble, it's over to you.
Thanks very much. Very good to electronically meet all of you and hear from you. I would second many of the things that I've already said, but rather than, clearly the situation is grave, but rather than dwell on that, I thought I'd share our views on what we're actually seeing on the ground, which gives us some cause for optimism, right? I think what we're seeing is, and the analogy I'll give is, it's a bit like a Mumbai local train, which is, everybody's adjusting a little bit to accommodate the next person in order for everybody to get from one point to another in their journey. And so what we are seeing on the ground is pragmatism has set in very quickly. Customers are getting reasonable about refund expectations. Principal service providers are getting more flexible and creative in the solutions that they can offer to keep things going. Employees are becoming more accepting of pressures on remuneration and the sacrifices that Rajesh referred to. And clearly, many leaders in the industry have led from the front very, very clearly, taking the first bullet before allowing the rest of the organization to absorb any of the pain, right? So I think for me, whilst I can see that pain, just the fact that we're being able to take that pain and diffuse it across the entire ecosystem gives me some cause for optimism that says, look, if we were all to adjust a little bit for the coming periods, we should be able to make it through. Yes, there are disputes, but the courts are closed, so there's no litigation. And therefore, there is almost a natural incentive to try and negotiate your way out of situations. And I think that's also helping the situation a fair bit. I think one of the key stakeholders in this entire equation is clearly the government, and I think the government's doing its bit. But I think there are some pragmatic things that we can put into place, right? So certainly the relaxation of expectations on statutory duties, on the timing of compliance obligations, and so on and so forth. But even simple things like the government put out a very laudable initiative that where they said that the government would effectively contribute both the employee and the employer PF contribution for employees below a certain income threshold, working in organizations below a certain employee count threshold. But that could be rolled out further, and they need not fund it, right? I think even if they went as far as saying for the next 12 months, you're not obliged to make any statutory contribution towards the Provident Fund. Neither the employee nor the employer is obliged to do that. What that does is that effectively takes the pressure off any remuneration challenges for the employee, and it takes a little bit of cost burden off from the employer, and it enhances the bandwidth to keep people in employment, right? So I think there are more things that can be, really pragmatic solutions where we're not asking the government to effectively underwrite our business plans, but we think just by taking a step back and saying, look, let's call a moratorium on more than just a short-term debt repayment. Let's look at other different kinds of contributions and figure out how it is that we can, and if that means that the retirement age has to be extended from 58 to 59 or 60 or whatever it is to make good for this shortfall in retirement contributions, I think the workforce would be up for that. I don't think there's any challenge around that. With increased life expectancy, there should be a challenge around that as well. I think the second thing is, to my mind, is that the Indian travel growth story has always been supply driven. As we added aviation capacity, we were able to attract new segments of customers into the market. As we added hospitality capacity, we were able to attract new segments of customers into the market. That's how the leisure market evolved. That's how the MICE market evolved. As unit economics dropped, we saw that Indian SMEs became more ambitious about targeting national markets and international markets because the cost of accessing those markets started to drop as well, right? So I think from my expectations from the authorities would be for a fundamental shift in the way we look at this category, right? This is not a sin category. It's not a consumption category. This is an enabler for strong economic growth. It's an accelerator. It injects velocity into the system, and it is supply side. So actually, you don't have to helicopter money all over the ecosystem. You have to pick the small number of supply side participants and give them the patient capital. And I think those are mainly the airlines, to a large extent the hoteliers. And I think if we are able to provide patient capital, and we saw that in the case of Singapore Airlines with Temasek, which is the Singaporean sovereign wealth fund step up. I mean, we have a sovereign wealth fund, the NIIF, and that needs to be mobilized now, and it needs to be mobilized to offer support to sectors that need patient capital, that don't have the asset concentration or the asset intensity that would allow conventional banks or conventional investors to lend to them, and view it as an instrument to effectively accelerate the services economy. And I don't think that it needs huge amounts of capital. We are talking about a small number of aviation players. We're talking of not a very large number of hospitality players. And the idea is to continue to encourage capacity addition so that we don't have to worry about demand generation on the other side, because we've proven in this market whenever we put the cart before the horse, every time we expanded capacity in terms of supply, demand has responded in a very encouraging fashion. So those would be my views.
Well, thank you, Rakshit. And since you talked about the government, and it's, I think, time for us to bring in the government. So, Srimati Rupinder Brar, Additional Director General, Ministry of Tourism. Can we, ma'am, have your views? And you have as much time as possible because we need the government now.
Thank you so much, Ashish, and thank you, FICCI. I think this has been a great initiative, much required, because it's the dialogue between the industry and the government, which is going to give us lots of ideas. Because at the outset, we've already mentioned the fact that there is a grim crisis before all of us that is undisputed, and the question, in fact, of evaluating as to how much is the crisis is still an ongoing one, and that itself is a question to worry about, that We are still in the middle of it all, and we don't even yet know where it's going to stop at. So clearly the need to therefore survive and to exist is the first and the most crucial concern, not only of the industry, but of the government at large, including that of tourism. I was looking at some of the reports, and while it may again be sort of starting a dialogue with the not so happy things that are happening, but it is necessary perhaps to create solutions. We need to understand where the problems lie. And therefore, I'm going to mention a few things first in terms of the problem areas, and then see where can the government step in and where can we work with you together to create the solutions for survival and also for the roadmap ahead as we go on. Very, very back of envelope calculations that have been coming in suggest that the industry of tourism and hospitality has about 70% of its workforce, which is in the MSME. And when we say MSME, I think the S is larger than the M here. So the number of people who are on the marginal sections are clearly huge. We're looking at estimated job losses of 38 million. I'm referring to the latest KPMG report that has, I think, been read by quite a few of us, but it gives a good analysis. In terms of what the government has already been doing, the industry and all of you, I think, have been part of the representations that came before us, which the minister actually went with us to the finance minister's office to flag the concerns regarding moratorium zone, GSTs to be rolled back, the TCS to be rolled back, even though that was not even directly concerning inbound, and license fee to be pushed back. All these have been documented and they have been represented in a very, very vociferous manner before the finance minister. As Dr. Suri observed, something out of it has come. A large part, we are hoping, is still going to come. But that we will need to continue to make the representations along a little bit more documented lines also needs to be done by all of us. I was there in that meeting, and because that happened about 15 days before now, it was just before the lockdown, in fact. We were still struggling with figures. The industry was trying to send in figures. Faith did some work. CII did some work. FICCI did some work to give figures. But again, those were even more back of the envelope. So probably the first thing we need to do as we are entering into the middle of the lockdown, so to say, is to put a little bit more meat into our argument in terms of figures and take it back to the finance ministry. So that's in fact my first request to the industry and to everybody who's listening, that can we back up arguments to really take the package discussion back to the Ministry of Finance. On the issues to be taken up with the state government, the minister's already in the process of writing. He's already written once, in fact, and he's going to write again to the state governments to look into the various taxes and licenses that happen at the state level, if they can be deferred. You're right, nobody is asking for saying that we are not paying. It's just a question of deferring it when the industry bounces back, which I'm sure it shall and we shall. Then the statutory payments are all going to come back to the government. That in the immediate is what we can say about the immediate survival. But having said that, I've also been looking at some other figures to understand that even in the immediate term or in the midterm or in the slightly long term, if we are to craft a strategy as to what do we really do, there are two ways of looking at it. And the one positive way of looking at it was that while what we are dealing with right now at the global level is clearly unprecedented, and perhaps none of us who is continuously involved in this process has ever been through anything so colossally creating a downturn for not only economy, but social levels, cultural levels, psychological problems. All sorts of problems are being confronted by the world as we speak. But having said that, I think what gives us hope also is that if we look at the working of the globe, for one reason or the other, there's been this study, it goes by the name of Kondratiev cycles, and these Kondratiev cycles are typically 10-year cycles where economies take a plunge down. And every time that the economy takes a plunge down, there is despair. And not only is there despair, there is also this sense that we are not going to get back. And though all of us may not have been alive when the last World War happened, but it is actually not that back in history. When World War II happened, it was as if the world is all over. But I think we have countries like Japan, which got bombed, which faced so much devastation, and many such examples to take hope from and say that if the world could, and after that, I'm sure we shall all bounce back. So while it will mean definitely creating the immediate survival packages, whether we are able to do them partly through governmental interventions, through the banking channels, or through changing the statutory limits, or hand-holding the S of the MSME a little more than the others to just give a little breath for everybody to survive. I think that's where we all need to be working for now, and we are. And that's why glad that we are doing this seminar. I think this is a discussion we've had at least 7 or 8 times in the last 10 or 12 days in a more organized fashion. And I would encourage that we need to continue to do that. But at the same time, we also need to be creating the midterm and the slightly more long-term dialogue. One has been attending a few seminars, webinars. Inputs are coming from all over the world. And again, therefore, for that reason, I went back to look at some trends as to where are the problems and how then are we going to leverage on the so-called some of the problems. One thing which has already come up for discussion is the China factor, that if China is not going to be the more favored destinations in the coming times, then can we as a country leverage all the tourists that were going to China? Maybe, maybe not. We'd have to see that. Because if we look at the cyclical performance of the countries away from India, in fact, right now, our own traditional markets, US, UK, Western Europe, they are reeling right now. And we are, in fact, if we look at the medical numbers of COVID-infected persons, I think in India, we are in fact slightly better off. So I may be pitching myself as a country which is relatively more untouched, relatively untouched, hopefully, and praying that in the coming few weeks, the numbers don't really spiral. Yes, there is an opportunity, but then counterintuitively, what is also being seen is that because those economies are not really doing well, because if they are looking at a lockdown and a shutdown, then how are they going to be creating the disposable incomes that are going to be required for them to be investing for coming for tourism into our country? And that's where the whole cyclical nature of global economy is something that becomes very crucial for us to understand in terms of our marketing pitch. In another forum and in a number of other debates that have happened in the last few days, therefore, the one opportunity and the more immediate one that seems to be coming up is, again, hoping that India does not go through the kind of impact that Western Europe or America is currently going through, or what Wuhan went through, is the domestic market, and how do we really tap it? Interestingly, and this was, I think, in ITO last year, Dr. Suri, I think you were the one who remarked on the need for us to tap domestic tourism, and how prophetic could I have been. And taking a lead from that, we in fact started with the Dekho Apna Desh campaign in January, and we launched that thinking that, okay, it's a fledgling effort, let's do something around it. And could we have been doing it at a better time? I think, therefore, coming to the whole issue of Incredible India, while partly I agree that we should be heading ourselves elsewhere, but not only for tourism, but for all sectors, to revive. I think we have to go back to the strength of the domestic market to fuel its own consumption. And if we can get that engine going, we'd be far less touched in the negative way. I take all of you back to the post-2008, the Lehman Brothers crisis. I think India survived because India was relatively less linked to a lot of other economies. If we go back to the Asian crisis of 97, again, we were able to survive more because we had the domestic engine of consumption and production going. And I think that's where we need to leverage our strength at. And we need to be starting to work at products and promotional campaigns around that. And coming to what products should we be working on, I would be very, very happy to create dedicated teams for my promotion campaigns. We had a long meeting with the social media team today. I wanted to do that before we had this webinar. And my regional directors, the social media team, we brought in a couple of experts. All were of the view that it's going to take a little while, even in the domestic market, assuming that India really recovers fast, for people still to actually develop the confidence of traveling a little away from their homes. There is also going to be the practical issue of people being away from work for a few weeks. There probably isn't going to be any vacation in summer. So these are clearly challenges also looking at us. And in tight situations of cash flows, then is this a sector which is relatively a more discretionary spending? Are we looking at people investing in it? But can we start thinking somewhere out of the box and start creating small packages, those one-day ones, the day trips, the weekendy ones, just to start the confidence growing? I think somewhere we'll have to make a beginning. And while in the middle of the lockdown, it may not seem to be the right time, but it's only now when we start looking and working at the right products that we can actually start looking at coming back at least at the end of April or early May. In the meantime, I'm again requesting and reiterating, and I shall be sending a request to FICCI formally, is to nominate 1 or 2 or 3 people who can be part of our social media team, because the promotion part is where the government can really step in. We would be very, very happy to engage with all of you to pitch and promote the products and the methodologies in a manner that you would want us to do. I was reading about a package being done by somebody in Scotland who's using the forward contract methodology of bookings. So probably things like that need to kick in, and we need to think out of this problem, this grim time, to come out with something unique. Maybe we need to start crafting virtual tours. If it's virtual today, then how to convert it into a real-time package. We could do a lot of things together, but I think while we do need to be somber and we need to be definitely holding on to our cash flow statements and only definitely spending both at the micro and at the macro level on something that is crucial and is oxygen giving. But at the same time, we should not lose sight of the fact that mankind and humanity has huge resilience and huge abilities to think out of the box and come out with innovative solutions as we go ahead. I, of course, had written a few other things, but we leave that to the question and answers and also to discuss maybe in the smaller group. But one small, again, a positive thread that a lot of readers suggesting that, you know, just before COVID happened, also the world was not really in the pink of its health as far as economy went. There were trade wars, there was clamping up, there was general sense of closing borders. And even within India, I think we were facing our own kind of challenges with people adjusting to different ways of doing things. There's been a lot of stress in industry. So if that be the case, it made me think that would it make my job even tougher? And then you start looking at country data. And interestingly, it was a learning for me too, that when I actually looked at the purchasing managers index, which seems to suggest that if any country is going below the 50 mark, that's the time when you're looking at a recessionary trend. India, interestingly, for the last 6 months that the data was available for in that particular sheet, has never gone below 50. Interestingly, in February, when the world had already, or at least China had already started looking at the impact of the pandemic, India was still at 54.5. China from Jan to March has come down from 50 or 51 to about 40. It's actually gone down by more than 10 points. So it's into that zone of recessionary trends. We are not yet in that. March, yes, I'm sure it shall. And particularly when it comes to our industry, it shall definitely plunge. But then how do we get back and how do we quickly work on our strengths of yoga, meditation, going back to the real life? We were working on a strategy today that could foods from India. Every day, if we put out a campaign, 29 different states, can I make a new dish every day? Put up not in a very high-end video, maybe handcrafted, home crafted, and say, dhokla, samosa, parantha, dekho apna desh, machar jhol, dekho apna desh, Bengal, apna desh, machar jhol, dekho apna desh, Bengal, So maybe we can at least create a buzz. I'm a huge optimist. Deepak, you said you're an optimist. I am a bigger one. And I do believe that we shall find new ways of doing things. And we shall definitely emerge stronger out of this. From the government side, I can only say we are with you in all senses, whether to create the packages that need to be pushed for in the current scenario, and whatever that needs to be done from the Ministry of Tourism. We are definitely with all of you in the industry in this moment of grim economic and medical scenario. And we look forward to support from all of you as we take the entire industry forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Rupenderji. I actually saw some shoulders lifting while you were speaking. So that's very encouraging. And I now invite Shreya Guha, who's Principal Secretary, Tourism, Government of Rajasthan, who's known to be leading from the front. And I think Rajasthan made the first move on a couple of things. So please, ma'am, over to you. And you have as much time as you would want.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all the panelists and all the listeners in the audience today. And I'm really grateful to FICCI for organizing this and having this event today, because I think in this situation, in these unprecedented times, we need to get together as many times as possible, and all stakeholders need to sit together and deliberate as to which is the way forward, because the situation is still developing and one doesn't know which way things will go. So one will have to try and react and try and do some course correction as we go along. I am representing the government of Rajasthan, but I'm sure all state governments are going through the same situations that we are facing now. And Rajasthan is a state that has tourism as the chief industry, so to speak, because it's the driver of all economic development here. We are the biggest employer, so every remote corner of the state gets affected because we've got hotel establishments in every part, even in the rural areas. So if there has been a downslide, if there has been shrinkage in terms of employment, it has hit the poorest, really, so to speak. So maybe in many states it's focused on the cities, but for us it's also the rural area. And sometimes I really think we've been like the foot soldiers in the battle, because we've taken the first blow. So the lockdown effectively has come in the second half of March, but for this industry, at least in Rajasthan, we've shut down from the 1st of March effectively, because we've had to cancel all our events, and March is the most eventful month for us, because it's almost the peak of our season, and March, April is when we do a lot of events. And so it's been tragic. A lot of planned things have had to be retracted and cancelled. And the first two cases that we had here were a couple of Italian visitors. And then that led to an exodus, because we had to escort and help most of the tourists out of the state. So we went through a couple of weeks of turmoil. Seeing the situation, we were perhaps one of the first to react in terms of giving some immediate relief to the industries. So we brought down the bar license fees immediately. So there were a couple of relief in terms of paying the bar license fees, and that's been appreciated. And secondly, we've also done a deferment of the state tax. So for 3 months to begin with, because that was the first reaction, this was done somewhere as soon as the lockdown was announced. So we moved in that direction. And just before this meeting, I attended a meeting regarding a discussion on how the exit plan is to be developed. So it's not that the governments are not reacting, because governments are also trying to, I mean, of course, on the medical side, there is a huge challenge that's being faced. So most of government's efforts are being channelized in that direction. Government resources are going in that direction. Government resources are also going to help those who are at really the poorest of the poor, reaching out to them. But in the middle of this, government does realize that if you don't bolster industry, you don't get in the revenues. And if you don't get in the revenues, you're not able to do even your social sector expenditure. So keeping that in mind, we've had a discussion today regarding our exit plan, that if the lockdown is to end in a staggered manner, then how can the industry respond, and how can we gradually bring in some kind of revival? So, I mean, we are talking in terms of, can we open up our restaurants in a partial manner? Can we open up our monuments in a very staggered and a partial manner, ensuring that all the social distancing norms, all the hygiene norms are maintained? So at least that gives a sense of positivity, that gives us a sense of somehow returning to normalcy, And we've also been thinking that what's been happening is there are certain pockets where these hot spots, so to speak, where there are more concentration of these corona cases. And if, let's say, there are pockets which are unaffected, then when can we do something about those? So we are still in the middle of that discussion, and we hope that we're able to come up with something very soon which gives some kind of a morale boost, not only just to the industry, but to the entire ecosystem as such. But as all the speakers have been saying, I think that what is now going to happen is that we have to completely rethink the way we've been doing our business. The more innovative the product, the more whoever responds first to by coming up with an innovative product is the one who will, I think, survive and be able to go forward. Because let's say, as someone was mentioning, we may not be getting big groups of senior citizens traveling now. So do we have to cater for the single traveler now? Do we have to cater more for the millennial rather than the senior citizen? Because Rajasthan, for example, gets a large amount of footfall from the European countries and senior citizens who travel in groups. So now we have to rethink that whole situation. How can we use technology? Today we've been discussing that, is there any way that we can put all our content online so that the heritage of the state, which is so well documented, is available to people online so that they can plan their future travels whenever they wish to. So again, I think hygiene is an issue that we have to rethink completely. I don't think any of us focus too much as an industry as to what is the hygiene routine being followed. But now the hygiene norms themselves have got redefined. So we've all got to rework that. So even, let's say, for my own monuments, if I have to open them, so now I have to think of how the hygiene protocol has to be maintained so that even if I open it, then I don't have any fresh cases. So I think it's not just, we've been talking about survival and revival. So it's not that, I think it's a three-pronged strategy that we need to think about. Survival as the immediate exit plan, the immediate relief that needs to be given, the immediate support. Secondly, we've been talking about what government can do to evolve a package so that business gets bolstered, and maybe for the whole year, some kind of hand-holding has to be done so that the situation stabilizes. And thirdly, I think the industry itself has to respond and try and think as innovatively as possible and come up with new products. Because apart from that, I think unless we all work together, it's not just the government that can provide the need relief. But I also feel that there is a lot of resilience in this industry, because I've seen that this is one industry that responds very well to any situation. It's the first one to come up with a new product, the first one to gauge the market and come up with something new. And I have that faith. And this is again another industry, because I've worked in so many sectors now over the years, that I find this is one sector which works very closely with the industry. In fact, most of the things that we do, the planning we do, that the policies that we make is only after very intense discussions. So I have full faith in the industry that they will respond, they will revive themselves, and they will be able to find a path forward and come up. And the turnaround time also, I find, in the industry is much quicker than the others. They're able to rework themselves, reboot themselves very fast. So I have a lot of faith. And I'd also like to mention that we're just today creating a group. We have this forum called the Stakeholders Forum, and we keep meeting once in a while to have discussions about what to do. And we are creating a subgroup which is going to suggest a revival package, or what we can have as a list of demands which we can further negotiate. Because as I said, there are 2 demands which have been taken care of partially, but what further needs to be done? Because I mean, for all of us, it's an evolving situation. So we are going to work with the industry to try and come up with suggestions. And I would also request Rupinder ma'am, that I believe Government of India is also thinking of forming a task force, or maybe has already done that. So the state governments could also be taken on board, because we are the ones who are really facing the music in the field. And we're facing a crisis on a day-to-day basis and trying to cope with the situation. So if our feedback is also taken and our suggestions are also taken on board, then that will be a big support to us as well. And so I mean, these are my introductory remarks. So I guess we could now have a discussion or open up for question and answers.
Ma'am, I have to tell you, I personally found your discourse very refreshing. And for a moment, I forgot I was listening to a principal secretary tourism, but I thought I was listening to a travel agent and a tour operator. And that's the kind of DNA which needs to come in for all of us, especially when you said about staggered opening and hotspots being linked to the activities of travel and tourism, because that's what is really going to be worldwide, not only in India, but worldwide, help us make our cash flows and revenue streams going, because it has to be in sync with what's happening, not only worldwide, but within the country. So thank you, that was very refreshing. We have had a late entry from Dhruv Sirangi, who's the co-promoter of Yatra, now part of EBIX, who brings a lot of value and discussions. Dhruv, I don't know how much at what stage you came in, but welcome. And you have about 3 minutes to say before we open up some more discussion. Dhruv?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ashish. And firstly, my apologies to everyone for joining in late. These are truly unprecedented times for our industry. And I think we're all grappling with the consequences, a lot of which is constantly in a state of evolution. So we are yet to reach a stage where we can say this is the new norm. I think there are so many moving parts in the business that we are all trying to get our heads around. But I think there are 2 or 3 maybe key emerging themes which we need to look at. And as we work with and within the industry and with the government, those are areas that we need to see how we look at putting something together that takes this industry through to the next phase. This is going to be a slow recovery for the industry. I don't think this is something which will, vanish into thin air in a quarter or two's time. The impact of this will be felt through for a period of time. And from that perspective, I think it's very important to get some support from the banks, from the government, from the financial institutions that we are dealing with, to ensure that there is adequate amount of liquidity that is maintained within this industry. My big concern at this point in time is that there are so many choke points on liquidity that you could end up at a scenario where maybe upstream liquidity gets throttled, and that then has a cascading effect all through the supply chain in the country as regards to the travel industry. So maintaining liquidity is I think a critical thing from a government's point of view. There have been some steps that the government has taken. We've got a 3-month moratorium in place at this point in time. But unlike a lot of other industries which will bounce back relatively quickly, travel will take a much longer period of time. I don't think any of us envisages a scenario where, in a month's time, people will be going on group tours, or you'll have a large number of foreign tourists coming into the country. So from that perspective, the liquidity process for this industry needs to be thought through differently, and a relatively longer period of time, hopefully, a 12-month kind of moratorium needs to be provided to support the working capital and the liquidity in this industry. The second point which is there is that we need to start also thinking about how to generate more demand, especially for domestic tourism. In the near term, it's highly unlikely that international travel will pick up. You can imagine a scenario where now countries like Singapore are also enforcing a hard lockdown for a period of 30 days. US is in complete shambles right now. Europe is struggling. So one doesn't really see international travel taking off anytime soon. We will have to ensure that domestic travel gets incentivized appropriately to make sure that we can take up the slack which will be left by international travel. So from that perspective, one of the things that, in some of our other discussions with the government, we've proposed that if, like LTA, there can be a tax holiday or a tax rebate provided to an individual for spending on domestic travel. So I'll give you an example. Hypothetically, someone can get a rebate of up to rupees 1 lakh from a tax break point of view for traveling domestically. Another thing to look at is from a MICE point of view, a meeting, incentive, conferences, and events, encouraging companies to do those domestically as opposed to internationally, I think will also help support a lot of the domestic tourism and the hotel operators in the country. So providing some kind of GST relief on that, or GST incentive for doing things domestically, I think again will add to the demand generation. So from my perspective, thinking about these two things, one is about ensuring there is enough liquidity in the industry for the foreseeable future, and working on some things that will stimulate demand for the travel industry are critical. We've also seen some, press articles earlier today around the entire use of force majeure, and how airlines and other suppliers might end up evoking that clause. We need to make sure that if something like that is done, it is done keeping in mind the interest and protecting the millions literally of jobs which are dependent in the value chain further down below. So it's a critical time for all of us, and I think this is the time that needs us and needs the government to act proactively, to take some of these more macro steps that will help us provide the much needed oxygen, I can literally call it that at this point in time, for the industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dhruv. Just a little housekeeping. I must mention to you that I've just been told we have over 5,500 people in the audience at the moment listening to all of you. So that's one. And second, before we move further, I'm also flooded with questions on my WhatsApp here to be asking the esteemed panelists. I'll try and, of course, when we get to the Q&A, try and put them in clusters, because rather than individual questions, which then could be very time consuming, I'll try, while I read, cluster them together. But the takeaway we have from the first round of discussion is that I think we more or less seem to be on the same page, which really says that there is a survival which needs to work, there's a revival which needs to work, there is an immediate issues which need to be dealt, and the entire industry, any segment, government or private, needs to be working together to be able to tackle this in totality. And importantly, Rupinder-ji mentioned about the task force. And I liked it when Srimati Shreya Guha mentioned that the state would want to be part of it. I mean, that's very encouraging. The task force, therefore, is highly recommended to be working between government, various bodies and the private players. But moving on to one quick round, and we'll be back to Dr. Suri for very quick view on whatever she's heard so far and how she would like to summarize it in few strategical moment, so to say.
Actually, I'd sort of gotten off the call. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I think I can. Yeah.
Yeah. I missed out on what Shreya ji said completely, but I did pick up the last bit about the task force. And Shreya ji, if you remember, when we came and used a national tourism task force, and we talked about it being stakeholders as well as the government, the ministry as well. So I think that's something that we could do very quickly. To summarize what I've heard, I think we're all on the same page, and it's about the survival. So the revival will only come if we survive. I think that's the key issue. We all need to survive. And there were some pointers about some of the loans that have to be taken. And a lot of the service providers have no collateral that they can offer to the banks. So I think the banks really need to be given a directive. And the directive will have to come from the Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank of India, that the banks have to really support all of them. I mean, how do they give a collateral? And on the other hand, there are some banks that, despite having collaterals, are not dispensing any money. So I think that's where the key issue is. It's all about the cash flow or the lack of availability of funds that is actually causing this whole thing. So if the funds come in and we are able to survive, it trickles down to the last guy. It goes down to the last guide that we have. So that's the survival kit that we're asking for. We're not asking for any freebies. We're just asking for support so that if the big players survive, the small players will automatically survive. And once we have survived this pandemic, which we will, I'm convinced that we will, the revival will happen. The revival is going to be very slow, but again, it is, as was mentioned by several panelists, that we are a very resilient country and a nation, and we will come out of this pretty much like we've come out of many other situations, and we all have to work together. As all of us need to join hands, we need to work together, we need to share our problems with each other and do whatever we can. Someone mentioned about starting from the top, and the leadership has to take on the responsibility of taking the first bullet. And I think all of us have done that. From my side, for the next 6 months, myself and the 3 executive directors are not taking any salary. The senior management has taken a 50% pay cut so that those people who are below 25,000 get their salaries. So this is something that is going on, and I'm sure several others, in fact, everyone is doing their bit. Thank you very much, Ashish. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Suri. One of the points which came out in a pre-session we had is, whereas we are talking about leadership who's present here, but we do realize that human beings and manpower form a very important base in the travel and tourism industry. And whereas it does that, it's on us to keep the morale in some manner up, to be able to communicate rightfully not only the facts on the ground. And as Rajesh said earlier, and I'll ask him to come in, of course, he says not only should they be the reality, which is smell the coffee, but the communication going across to the industry shouldn't be, oh, we are dead and we are doomed, and we leave a lot of insecurity because that cannot help us. Today, we have the Prime Minister of the country appearing on the television from time to time. And what is he doing? He's only trying to keep our insecurities out of our thinking in some manner. So what do we have to say for that? Rajesh, you had something to say last time you knew when we discussed this. What's the message to the employee base? Rajesh?
Sorry, I was on mute.
The message for industry employees at large.
No, I heard your question. It's a very difficult situation all around, and especially people. And what is that you end up doing? At least one of the things that we've been doing constantly. In fact, before this meeting, We were on a leadership team on the entire leadership team on Zoom, um, just taking stock on the feedback from people on the from various functions, especially during the lockdown situation, right? I mean, how are they engaged? What are they feeling? What are they insecure and all of that? I think one of the things that we um, have just been doing and want to continue to keep doing it through directly from the top, next level leaders, even the immediate managers and all that is to basically over communicate, take the questions. So we've actually worked on various forums to be able to stay engaged with them and just keep addressing some of those questions. So you can't just what you need to be doing is that you also have to keep yourself honest and more transparent and keep sharing the real life situation also with them. When last time that we announced, and I think Dr. Suri also mentioned, and some of the pay cuts, etc., that we ended up announcing it starting from the top. Uh, we got an overwhelming response from people as well. So the moment you keep it more transparent, the moment you keep it more honest, I think it helps you. And it helps people because that's what they want to hear. That's what they want to just keep hearing an update from you of what's happening. Otherwise, what's happening, it can really get onto your nerves when you are working from home, especially for those people, just in terms of insecurity in their mind. So I think I would say over communication, complete transparency, and just try to be honest. And like I said in the beginning, just to make sure that you, whatever hard decisions, and mind you, and I'm not going to really paint a very rosy picture here. I mentioned it upfront. I think it's going to be painful. I think it's going to be sacrifices from everyone, but more we can try and absorb at the level who were earning more or could afford more. It'll be good for the industry, so that we are able to protect the people who draws less amount of salary, and they just probably have no other options for them to be able to just earn their living. So I think if we follow these few principles, then hopefully, in fact, we've seen it so far so good. Fingers crossed that people actually rally together with you, and try to just fight the battle together with you.
Yeah, thank you, Rajesh. So coming into some of the questions, and actually some of them are actually statements and not questions. Here's somebody who's saying um, that he's not personally in agreement with GST being deferred because it doesn't help till you start business again, but that's just a thought. It also says the Ministry of Tourism needs to work on a comprehensive strategy of promoting destinations, both for inbound and domestic, and pick up 10 source market and launch them as soon as the dust settles, etc., etc. I think we have talked about it, but Rupinder ji, you want to add a line to that?
Yeah, definitely, Ashish. I think that's a valuable suggestion. And as you have noticed that I mentioned it, that while we are still working on the immediate issues, we should not forget that there will be soon a midterm and a long term, and we need to do our homework. And that's why the analysis of where is it that we can start the inbound first when we move out of the domestic. I think the study of which countries are relatively less impacted by the crisis becomes very important. And that's why looking at a country like Japan perhaps might be rewarding, because while Japan is actually getting about 40 odd cases a day, but still it is not really facing the pandemic the way the others are. It has a high disposable income. It has a lot of things of interest in the Indian market, might be very interesting. Similarly, if you look at Brazil also an interesting market for India. And if I looked at the purchasing index, it's still doing fairly well. So I think we have to identify those source markets for the Q3 and Q4, particularly for this year, where the chances of revival are higher. Last year, we were all very excited about working on China itself, but well, that's a story that's going to get pushed back a little bit for now. But I'm sure if we work together in these dedicated task force we will be able to arrive at more scientific data as to which are those countries which we should be pitching in at. Interestingly, and since you've given me a chance, I'll add two more things at this juncture, that there's no excitement from our side also. As I was doing my bit of the conversation, my regional director from West, Venkatesh, has already started sending me inputs on what all we need to be doing. So rest assured, at least on that there is so much interest in the ministry also to work together. And he's mentioned to me, especially, so I must mention it, that there is this book by the Tatas, the Bridgetal, done by Chandrasekhan and Rupa Purushottam, representing the Tata view of looking at economy. It's all about resilience, it's all about determination, and they look into these hinterland stories of India as to how we can rebuild, even creating the bridges between the rural and the urban. So I think so there are so many things to actually work on, and believe me, I think if we keep our frame of mind a little more positive, and Dr. Suri mentioned about not taking salaries for the next few months, and Rajesh, you also mentioned that also, and you are saying it again today. Yes, I think that's the need of the hour, that we all need to see that whoever's very, very on the margin, the hand is held, even if it means sacrificing on a few things. On the National Task Force thing, Shreya, I'm glad you brought it up, because in fact, the minister would soon be making an announcement for that, so I didn't really want to mention it today. But yes, the ministry is working on that. And in terms of the state's involvement, we are of the view, in fact, that the agenda also should be set in consultation with the state, because you are the ones who actually deliver at the ground level. So there's no question of having a task force which would have the states as representatives, and all the related trade and hospitality associations have to be very much a part of it. In fact, we would just be providing the box in which everybody has to fill their ideas and actions and thoughts into. So those are some of my observations.
So I take the liberty of asking two from my side. Do you see the role of the overseas government tourist offices changing? Do you see the way tourism industry markets itself in terms of trade fairs, etc., and big extensive ITBs and WTMs, etc., change? Because those were huge costs. Do we remodel that?
I would really encourage all of us to think. One, not only because COVID has happened, but I think it's a good idea even to think otherwise, because if we keep doing business as usual, because again, pre-COVID also, if we really look at the numbers that we are getting into India, I think there are questions that we need to address, that are we really going the right way? So I would say in some way that COVID has given us a chance to actually step back and review. Yes, we should definitely be working together and reviewing and keeping those practices which are working well for us, and maybe giving up something that wasn't working, repositioning our resources, especially in this year when we are going to have a dearth of resources and the need would be entirely else. So the role of overseas offices definitely needs to realign in the changing scenario. In any case, I was of the view that we should be rebooting, relooking, because there's so much talk around sustainability now. And these are some of the strengths of India. And if we look at what tourists are looking for in terms of those immersive experiences, going to the potter's wheel and actually making that tuta puta matka, going to an embroider's workshop and actually sitting and doing an embroidery. So I think those are the strengths that we have. And we should anyways be trying and leveraging those and using digital technology like we are doing now, reaching out to 5,500 odd people and crafting out such kind of marketing tools. Incidentally, from the ministry, we are also starting webinars, which should kick in, I think, later this week or early next week. The idea in those webinars is to bring people who are attached with tourism. Again, these are people on the margins at times. It could be a cook, it could be a guide. He's just going to walk you through a tour that he does normally, talk to you in an interesting way. It's a marketing tool again. We're also going to try and bring in the heritage walk people to create and craft webinars. So you could be sitting in New Delhi talking about Chandni Chowk, and somebody down south could actually join the webinar and use that as a tool to create packages for the coming time. So we are thinking on a few ideas, but as I said, we are very, very open to getting ideas from the industry on how to rejig and how to rework.
Thank you. Scanning through the questions from the audience, though already addressed 2 of them. Some of them I'll just flip past because I think they have been addressed by the panel. How is it going to affect foreign travel in India? We've talked about it. How is it going to affect the startup industry in India? I think the startup will be affected the same way as anybody, because I do believe for everybody it's really a startup. We are all going to be starting from scratch in some manner. We have to think of building our models from scratch. So, and it's all a matter of cash flows and making it happen. How does the way of doing business change post-pandemic? I think we've discussed that at length. One question about how do we receive refund from airlines and IATA? I would answer, unless Ankush wants to come in, or Dhruv, it's an ability for the airline to pay back, or for any supplier to pay back. Everybody is suffering with cash flows. So you want to take on, Ankush, quickly in one line?
Yeah, so Ashish, we just kind of heard this news article, this notification just 2 days back. So I think this is something which we have to support the airlines. However, they also have to understand our concern. And Dhruv and I actually just had a chat yesterday on, creating a white paper kind of stuff and talking to the airlines, because there's a lot of money stuck. And this is going to be in like some 100 million and above if I take the whole of industry put together, including domestic as well as international.
Right. So I won't go to other micros, which says what will be the reduction in hotel taxes. We'll have to wait and see. Update on TCS, I think that's been deferred. But anyway, the government will look at it in a holistic manner. How will the travelers' taste and preferences change? I think we've talked and discussed it at length. And all of us really can't put a finger today and say it's going to change this way. We'll have to all wait and be quick on our feet to be able to do that. So that's broadly it. They've talked about stimulus for tourism. How will domestic tourism take shape? Again, we've discussed that. Our sanitization, wayside amenities of tourist locations to be upgraded. I would certainly think that's a point for consideration, because if everything is going to be relooked at, if you're going to relook at our business model, if you're going to relook at our establishment, enterprise costs, I think in some way the government also needs to relook at the tourism sites and monuments, etc., to make it more hygienic, more upgraded, more comfortable. Because I personally do believe, and I think some of the panel would believe, that there would be some kind, just like TripAdvisor today has a rating on resorts and hotels and destination, I see a rating coming in on a safety meter. Somebody coming forward to declaring it, how safe is X and Y and so on. It's bound to happen, I would say. So that's the way it is. And somebody said about, in the same line, about promoting and pushing the concept of responsible tourism, because we have sort of ravaged our own tourism destinations in a manner. I read the article about Ganga looking cleaner after in the lockdown, but well, that's the way things are. I think I more or less covered the question part. 1 second, just give me a minute. There's so many of them. I'm trying to see if we can do justice to all, guys. Actually, they pretty much cover what we had talked about, and I think they would have the answers because they've been coming. Growth potential post-corona. Right. So let's just. Some of us have also conveyed they would want to start moving on from the panel. So let's do it this way. Let's just have our one line key moment, all of us, as to what we think we want to leave behind with the audience as a lasting thought from each one of us side. And we start in the same manner as we started with Dr. Suri. One line, your key moment for the industry, for the audience who's listening to you.
We're all in this together, and I'm convinced that we will overcome it. We will hold hands with each other and cross this tumultuous river I'm very confident of that. So hang in there, stay positive, stay motivated. We will overcome this.
Great. Deepak, over to you.
Thank you. So I think this is the greatest test for leadership and the responsibilities that it comes with. This is the greatest test for companies that have had financial discipline and that have not had financial discipline. And this also takes us to the future, where we have to think of running businesses in a profitable manner in order not to reach this state again. We also have to make sure and believe that tourism will never be the same again. We would be asked questions like, do you have enough hospital beds? Do you have enough ventilators? As a part of our destination offering. And let that not surprise us. Also, people are going to go through the fear of virus, the virus fear. They're going to talk about cleanliness. They're going to talk about healthcare systems. Their insurance companies are not going to pay for traveling to areas that are not safe and secure. And there's a very interesting piece I read. I'm sorry, I've exceeded one line, but the initial lockdown restarting limited plane and train services with new rules such as planes will have to leave alternate seats empty. How is that going to impact price? You'll arrive at the airport 2 hours earlier. You'll probably have a COVID test before you get onto a plane. Like 9/11, it will change. Their security systems change. This time it will be focused on health. But all of this done, there is always a silver lining. Listen, we are India. We live on hope. And there is no question that we will not come back. There is no question that all of us together will, I'm sure all of us on this panel have and will continue showing leadership. And I'm sure our teams are also going to feel confident that the destination is going to bounce back. We heard excellent stuff from the government, and I'd like to thank the two ladies on the panel for giving their views. So that's for me, Ashish.
Over to you, Pranab, your one-liner.
Yes, thank you, Ashish. Everything cannot be, negative. I think we need to cheer up for something that tourism industry is the one which gives maximum employment from the private sector. That need to be realized by the government that today's date, if maximum job loss is going to happen, it will happen only in private sector unless they come into the picture and chip in something, some help, some guidelines. That is one. And number two, to cheer up our, small tour operator, if Shiraji can give some smile on the face by saying some words on the refund of the safari parks in Rajasthan and refunds of Palace on Wheels in Rajasthan, so that they can think about themselves to get back some money to refund their clients. With this, I thank you very much.
Thank you. Ankush.
So as Deepak is a positive person along with Ms. Goa, I think create positivity amongst your travelers. I think that's something as the ambassadors of this industry, we need to create that message across. Manage cash flows big time, because I think cash is king. Renegotiate your contracts with your supply or whoever you deal with. Think alliances, and I think don't take any major or bold steps for next 6 months. It's just like lie low and watch the game happening, and then step out and see and bounce back much faster and quicker in 2021. And I think take care of your teams and employees, because I think that is something you need to counsel them. You need to be transparent. You need to meet them very often and explain them the situation and carry them along in this tough times, which I hope will be over in the next few weeks.
Thank you. Over to Rajesh.
Yeah, I think the industry is going to find a new normal, guys. I think we should all look for that, and that's more on the positive side of it. Keep looking for learnings. I think this crisis time always teaches you a hell of a lot, and when you come out of it, you emerge actually as a lot more stronger. And I do believe in our country, people is the biggest strength. In every crisis, we all come together and rally together. And I think that the real entrepreneurial spirit is going to get tested, and that's plenty in this industry. I can see, because every small business house is being led by the entrepreneur, and I think that is what is going to be the strength. Feel about that, believe in that, and keep working towards. And I'm 100% sure that the industry will come out of it.
Thank you, Rajesh. Rakshit, over to you. Rakshit?
Yeah, we always say to ourselves, never waste a good crisis, because, things in a crisis situation become possible and achievable that would be unachievable in a business as usual scenario, because the resistance to change and the resistance, other constraints tend to cede away, I think crises are great levelers, because they hit the big as hard as they hit the small guys. And so there's always an opportunity there, and you have to just keep looking for it. So I think the resilient ones will come out stronger at the other end.
Right. Rupinder-ji?
So I think the same tenor and tone that I mentioned earlier, let's look at this crisis as a moment of introspection, a moment of looking at what could be the strengths for all of us. Clearly, there are many strengths that India has, and it's the right moment, therefore, to identify them. In some ways, I think with the world using too much of technology, I look at it like this, that while this is looking as a great opportunity of connecting, right now 5,500 on the Zoom, but I think we might also therefore be preparing ourselves for those detox moments, because there'll be too much of technology. And that's perhaps an opportunity which we as a country could be looking at exploiting from the business perspective. And we should. People are our strength. It's the homegrown experiences which are our strength. Storytelling is our strength. Let's build on those. And I will also use this platform, therefore, to push everybody to join our campaign of Dekho Apna Desh, and also do join and put your likes, your comments on our social media campaign. Look up the Brand India, Incredible India page on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. Leave genuine input on that. If you agree with our campaigns, great. If you don't, give your suggestions. We'll be hugely benefited. And of course, we'll be benefited with the number of people who are watching if they can join in and increase the traffic, increase the spread of Incredible India through your networks. It will be a huge takeaway for all of us as a country and as an industry. And once again, thank you so much for providing this wonderful platform of connecting from comfort of one's home. Thank you.
Thank you. Shreya-ji, you there?
Yeah, I would like to request the industry to come forward, work with us, and work on a three-pronged strategy, as I mentioned earlier. Work with us to form an exit plan. So whenever this lockdown is lifted, in whichever staggered manner, we are ready with a response. To work with us to develop a package which we can negotiate with the finance people, so that we are able to get you the best that we can under the circumstances. And to work with us to come up with new innovative products, so that we have new things to sell, new things to approach a new market. Because as everybody's been saying, things will never be the same. We'll have new markets, new niches to look at, and new avenues to think of. So please work with us, and that is my message to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Dhruv?
Yeah, so just echoing the sentiments made by pretty much everyone on the call before me. But for my peers in the industry, I would say, while we all hope for the best, I think we should also prepare for the worst. It'll be great if in a quarter's time, all of this is behind us. But for most of the businesses, I think now is the time to look at how you can make your business more efficient, make your business better, improve your processes, and just be prepared for the worst. Because on the off chance that this takes a bit longer than what we are all hoping for, we need to be resilient enough to see ourselves through it and come out stronger on the other side. So that would be my word to the peers. With regards to the government, my request would be of the government to take some steps at the earliest to introduce liquidity into the industry, whether that's coming in through an extended moratorium from the banks, whether it's clearing out backlogs of things like SEIS, etc. But I would request the government to move a bit more quickly and provide the much needed oxygen to this industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dhruv. And lastly, taking a cue that, I mean, as far as the technicalities of building your re-engineered business plan, cash flows, revival, survival will all be done by yourself. We all agreed that transparency in the need of the hour and everybody working together is the need of the hour. So therefore, I have proposed to FICCI as well that maybe the same panel or differently otherwise is to look at a medium where every 3 or 4 weeks you can have an open webinar where all the employee base of the entire travel fraternity, as 505,000 have logged in today, can log in and actually see what changes are happening, and one could communicate down to the grassroots levels. So that instills the industry confidence down to the thing. And if that's workable with you, I would like to carry that forward with FICCI to do that.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Ashish. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So on that front, I thank all of you for taking the time off. I know it's crisis time, but I also thank Mr. Dilip Chenoy, Secretary General of FICCI, for making his infrastructure and team available to make that happen. And let's not forget the hard work Manish Ahuja and Anirban Chatterjee has put across to make all this happen and supported all of us to make that happen. So on that note, thank you very much till we meet again, and stay indoors and keep smiling.
Yeah, and also thank you, Ashish.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Let's all take care of our people.
Yeah, stay safe.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Yes. And,
Take care. Take care, everyone.
And thank you, ladies, for joining us. Both of you have been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Pleasure. And it's nice to be part of the initiative. Let's work together.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Yes. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you.
हाँ, स्विच ऑफ कर दो अखिलेश.
Turning off one by one.